Today we're going to talk about beginning and seeing through a long-term personal project. Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. This is Dylan Golby. In today's video I want to talk a little bit about beginning and seeing through a long-term personal project. Now there's a lot of talk out there about how a personal project can, help you get work and show off your skills and things like that, but today I want to take it from the perspective of just doing a personal project for the sake of doing the work. By trade, I'm a family photographer. I absolutely love what I do. I basically get to create and record happy moments for young families, which, I mean, honestly, there's not really much more that you could want than making people happy with the work that you do. But when it comes to actually doing a personal project, I need to have something so far removed from that I'm not just photographing families in my off time in a slightly different way or something like that. So for me, a personal project is never something that is, done with the intent of getting work. It's done just because I want to grow as a photographer or to grow as a person and learn a little bit more about, myself and the things that I love. So in this video, we're going to talk a little bit about two of the personal projects that I have done, and we'll mainly focus on the really long-term one that I've been doing, which is Tattoos of Asia. When it comes to choosing a personal project to do, the real thing that you need to focus on is the fact that a personal project, within those words themselves, it has to be personal. It cannot be something with the goal of, hey, I want to be famous, or I want to get a whole lot of likes on social media. That sort of thing will not sustain you. That's an external goal. It's not something that's personal to you. So if you do start the project with the idea of, I want to be famous, and all of a sudden, that's not going as quickly as you might want it to, or I want to get a whole lot of likes on social media, and people aren't responding the way that you want them to, then you're going to give up on that project, and it's not going to ever get seen through to the end. So definitely start from a place of, this is something that I want to do, this is important to me. In the past, I've done a few projects where I sort of set out thinking that, yes, this is something that I really want to do. And slowly it's sort of come about that there have been other motivations in there. And those projects have never really worked out for me. They've never really been seen through to completion. So it's definitely important that you really take a look at your motivations behind a project and what it is that you are hoping to achieve by setting out and doing something like a long-term personal project. So as an example of starting off a personal project, let's take a look at my Tattoos of Asia project. Now, this all began with a slightly smaller project and then grew into a larger one over time. But the way that it initially began was about 2 years into me going full-time as a photographer, and I'd had an extremely busy season. So I'd worked for, I think it was 76 days straight, and I was sort of editing in between those sessions. And when that was sort of starting to draw to a close, I saw a window of about 2 weeks, and I said to my wife, can I take a personal trip? Can I just go somewhere and relax for a couple of weeks? And being the lovely soul that she is, she gave me the time off and said, go enjoy yourself, come back, hope you feel better when you arrive. Now, she didn't know what she was getting herself into at that point, and neither did I. I reached out to a good friend of mine, Etienne from Pics of Asia, and I said to him, hey, I know you've been to Myanmar recently and you've been to a couple of sort of off the beaten track locations. Do you have any, advice for me? I just want a little place where I can just relax for a couple of weeks. I don't want to see tourists. I don't want to go around and do 100 different things. I just need to relax, and I really want to go to Myanmar. And so he suggested that I head over to Miao. And so I didn't really do any research. I just sort of took his word for it. I trust him. I know the sorts of places he likes to go. I just found the nearest airport and booked a flight in and sort of figured out how I was going to get there on the fly. Now, the goal of that trip was initially to just wander around during the day, maybe meet a few people, and watch the sun go down with a beer in hand. Wake up, rinse, repeat. That was basically what I wanted to do for a couple of weeks. And as I was walking around, I started to see, these pictures in a few of the local restaurants of some, tattooed ladies and things on the walls there. Oh, it's kind of interesting. Maybe if I feel the need, I might go and do that. And it was one afternoon I was exploring some temples, and I ran inside due to a bit of a rainstorm coming down, and I met a man by the name of Koso, who would end up being my guide for quite a few of these upcoming trips. Now, unfortunately, Koso has since passed away. He was much too young, and so heart goes out to his family. But he did really make this project a reality, and it was that day that he actually said to me, hey, is there anything you want to do? Is there something that I can help you out with? And I said, I've been seeing these tattooed ladies around. How difficult is it, or how easy is it to get out and see them? And he said, it's no problem. We can do a morning trip and bring you back. I said, oh, okay, let's do it. And so we organized that for the next day, and we had a great time. Listened to some really interesting stories. People were really open and welcoming, and on the way back, I said to him, what else is possible? Like, how far can we go? And he said, oh, without government permission, it's very difficult. You can't get out of the tourist areas. I said, well, let's give it a go. Why don't we make a few phone calls when we get back? And so, we had some dinner, and we made a few phone calls, and eventually I managed to get a couple of police officers to come out with me, and we went and lived in the villages for a couple of days and went a lot further than you're supposed to be able to go on the little tourist run. So again, on the way back from that trip, we ended up talking about what else might be possible. And, I threw him a few ideas of, say, hey, if I came down to stay here for a few weeks, what would it take to make that happen? And so I said, I'll give you some time to sort of put out some feelers and see what you can come up with. And let's stay in touch via email. So we did. And, a few months later, there I was back in Myanmar, living in the villages for a few weeks, and I took along my good friend Wes Chang, who you can see a bit of his video playing as I talk here. And we basically, enjoyed our time, listened to probably 120 people's stories, and came back with the material for my first book. So having said all of that, the only two goals with that initial project were, one, to get out there, experience life in the villages, learn things from people whose way of life is so far removed from mine, and two, to hopefully be able to raise a little bit of money to give back to the people who contributed to my project. To that end, the project was published in a book, and 100% of the proceeds from that book go to the Laitu people. So hopefully Myanmar can overcome its current struggles, and I'll be able to get back there and make those donations. So that project was done, but I really wasn't. I was enjoying living in these villages, hearing stories about lives so different from my own, and photographing these beautiful faces. And so I decided to continue the project under the umbrella of the Tattoos of Asia, and basically explore the continent of Asia and see how many different tattoo-faced peoples that I could find. So in the end, I've been back to Myanmar a couple of times, been to India a couple of times, the Lao PDR, Taiwan. Most recently, I actually went back to Myanmar, and for that trip, Wesley Chang came along with me again and made a documentary about sort of what it's like to work on this project. So if that interests you, I'll link to that up here. So that's my story. That's how I began this mammoth project. The two main things that I want you to take away from that are, first, that it was something that I love. I love people and I love to travel. So that forms a really good basis for beginning a personal project. And the second thing is that I was just doing the work for the sake of doing the work and seeing where it would lead. So those two things will really help you to get started and, for example, like me, end up working on a multi-year project. Getting started on a long-term project is just the beginning. You really need to find ways to keep it going in the face of adversity. When things aren't quite going the way that you want them to do, you need to have a goal in sight that says, yes, I can actually get this done. Along the way, there are going to be internal and external factors that will just make you wonder if it's all worth it, or are you just completely wasting your time. So you really need to have a way to be able to finish that project, to be able to see it through. One truth about any long-term endeavor is that life is going to get in the way. And for example, if you're like me and your personal project is self-funded, nobody's giving you the money to do this, then work can get in the way, and it can seem like you're getting absolutely nowhere with that project. But the key here is to have small goals in between the big ones that will just keep you chipping away at the work. Now, for me, what that's been is working on small blog posts for my site, or organizing the interviews, or editing the images, and setting savings goals so that I can make sure I can go on that next trip. So having those little things in place just makes sure that I don't lose sight of where I'm headed with this project. In order to do all that though, you do need to know where you're going. So setting a manageable scope for a project is a really important first step. In my case, that has been cultural, facial tattoos of Asia. And that allows me to rule out things like some of the beautiful tattoos you'll find in South and Central America. It allows me to rule out some of the things like, arm and leg tattoos that you'll find all over Asia. It also allows me to rule out some of the modern tattoos where people have tattooed their faces for, aesthetic reasons or something like that. Setting that scope allows me to focus my resources, my time, my money, and my energy on just making sure that this project gets done. I won't waste a whole lot of energy and money on something that's not really related to the project. If it happens as I'm going around, sure, I'll photograph it, I'll make the interview, and maybe it will end up as a footnote in the book or something like that. But I'm not actively seeking anything other than cultural facial tattoos of Asia. Would I love to expand this project? Sure. I'd love to visit South America. I'd love to visit Africa. I would love to continue adding more and more pieces to this, but for the moment, that is the scope of the project that I'm trying to finish. Now, the other component of this project is the interviews that I conduct with these people. Now, I'm not an anthropologist. I'm not trained in that. I couldn't pretend to be trying to put together some sort of historical record of, the cultures that are disappearing or something like that. What I can do is listen to the stories of individuals and try to gather enough information so that I understand what they're talking about, and then put those into a collection of stories that detail the lives of the people who actually went through all of these things, rather than trying to generalize about an entire cultural population. Again, takeaways here. The first one is to set boundaries, and the second one is to be open to things that happen along the way, but be cognizant of the fact that they may lead you astray from what you're actually trying to do. Accountability might just be the most effective way of keeping a large-scale project on track. Now, the corporations of the world know this, and they have ways of tracking their employees and ensuring everybody is working towards a common goal on the right schedule. Now, of course, a single-man personal project like what I'm doing, much smaller scale, but still taking a leaf out of that book and knowing that you're accountable to something can force you to just do things on the days when you don't want to, or ensure that, I've got a trip in September and I know what I need to have done by July to make that happen. So it can pay for us to adopt a similar system to the way corporations work, just to ensure that we are actually progressing. A few of the ways that I like to keep myself accountable are, as I mentioned earlier, setting a manageable scope, setting a goal that's unrelated to the work itself, and also just letting people know what I'm doing. Now, the first one, manageable scope, we've discussed a little bit. A goal outside of the work is something like, being able to donate back to those people when the project is done. And the third one, telling people what I'm doing, is a great way for me because I know that I don't like to disappoint people. If I've told somebody I'm going to be there at 6 o'clock, I won't be there at 6:05. I will be there 5 minutes early. When I started my first book, I had no idea what was involved in a big project like this. I just jumped in to see what would happen. Now, I'd never shot thousands of photos on a single trip. I'd never done all these different interviews and had to collate all the different things that people had said. I'd never published a book before, but knowing that I had told these people, I am going to raise some money using this book and I'm going to come back and be able to help you with it, meant that there was no way I wasn't going to do that. That is something that I hold myself accountable to others to ensure that I'm just going to get it done. In a smaller way, I'll often also just tell friends and family, hey, I'm going to visit this region, I'm going to visit these people this year, so look out for that. Deadlines are another great way to make sure you're going to hold yourself accountable for things. Now, pre-COVID, I set myself the goal of working towards one trip each year. And so far I was able to afford that, which has been great, but it kept me accountable, it kept me working hard. It said, maybe I've got enough work this month. Hey, but if, I take on 2 or 3 more jobs, maybe I can add a little bit more to this journey this year. So it gave me something to work towards. It also gave me, you have to save this stuff by December because you're going. After all the things we've just discussed, choosing the right gear might seem like a trivial thing, but with a large project, especially one where you're traveling around like I am, gear can play a role in choice paralysis. It can also play a role in just how energetic you are, how much fatigue you're going to get from carrying all this stuff between location and location. So that was a real factor in my first trip. So when I went to Myanmar, we'd be traveling on boats and then walking between a lot of villages. So I decided to take with me my XT1 rather than my D800. Basically, that took a couple of kilograms off the kit and meant that I wouldn't be so tired when I arrived, and I'd be more willing to do more work in the short time that I had. On subsequent trips, I've had a little bit of a bigger budget, and I've been on land-based transportation, so cars and motorbikes. And so when Fujifilm, upon the release of the GFX 50S, offered to lend it to me for the trip, I had to say yes, and I had a car to take it with me so I wouldn't be hiking it up and down mountains too often. And it turned out that that was a really, really good tool for this project, because it allowed me to capture a whole lot more detail of the people that are basically disappearing from this earth. And so I was able to capture these really beautiful portraits that hopefully when they're blown up will look really good. So when it comes to lenses, I will usually only take a few because, again, we're trying to reduce weight. And so with the GFX system, that will be the GF 45mm f2.8 and the GF 110mm f2. Now, I'll usually have a backup system, which will be an XT camera and the equivalent lenses, so a 23mm f1.4 and the 56mm f1.2. I'll also take my X100, which just dangles off my wrist at all times, and that allows me to make pictures as we're walking around or talking to people, having interviews and things like that, without sort of disturbing the situation or, having to stop and put a camera on a tripod or something like that. That's my take on personal projects. First of all, they really, really need to be personal. They have to be something that you want to do. Deep down inside, this is something I want to create. Then you have to be accountable for it. You basically have to make yourself do the work, especially over a long-term project. And the third thing is to make sure that you're choosing the right gear. Is it going to help or hinder you? It really needs to be the gear that just gets the job done and doesn't get in the way. So I'm always really interested to know what other people are doing for their personal projects. So if you guys have anything that you're working on or something that you'd like to share, I'd love to see it in the comments down below. If you haven't already, please do like and subscribe, and we'll see you guys in the next one. Cheers.